If we were to lose to Senegal, whilst I don't like to use the word disaster, I think it would be a disaster for English football in terms of going out of a World Cup against a nation that we should overcome. Welcome to this week's edition of One to One with Simon Jordan, a World Cup special here in Doha. Don't forget to keep liking and subscribing and keep leaving the questions in the comment section below. And I'm back in England next week, but let's get on with this week's show. Look, I mean, we're hearing the story of Southgate is one that's fraught with different opinions. Some people are steeped in the belief that it doesn't matter what Gareth Southgate does, they don't want him, they don't like him, and I think that's really unfortunate and unfair. I think he was remarkably lucky to get the job. I think he got the job on the back of the fact that the FA, in my mind, a lot of the time are lightweights and they wanted someone that they could control and wouldn't cause them any problems. Now, he's raised the bar because the expectations were low. He's done what I think is a very decent job. There's lots of positives about what Gareth Southgate has done. He's sensible, he's pragmatic in his dealing with the media, he keeps things on a decent level. You can look at the wins and say that we've got a culture in English football now where the players want to play for their country. We haven't got these ridiculous divides at England camps where one group of players won't sit with another and generations of talented footballers end up delivering very little in outcome. That being said, I do think that Southgate is accountable for not having either the nous in Croatia or the balls in the European Championship to change things when it needed to be changed. Now, if you want to go to the crux of this question, if we were to lose to Senegal, whilst I don't like to use the word disaster, I think it would be a disaster for English football in terms of going out of a World Cup against a nation that we should overcome. There's a lot of talk now, and again, it kind of aggravates me without wanting to be in a constant state of irritation, but there's this football parlance now that there's a legacy. Roberto Martinez is talking about the legacy of Belgium and the group of players that have underachieved, as if a legacy is what people are employed to do. You're employed to build for the here and now. And England, under Gareth Southgate, are in a position to have achieved things. Of course, he's been successful in comparison with people that have gone before him. But the idea that England will be a legacy-based environment because he got to a semi-final in the World Cup in 2018, because he got to a final in 2020 in the Euros, or 2021 when we played it, doesn't mean that ultimately his tenure can be perceived as a success, because he put through a generation of players that ultimately an England under-21 manager would always play young players. If we get knocked out by Senegal, it'll be disappointing. It was disappointing to me that for some reason or other our FA felt the necessity to give someone a contract before a tournament when they should be tournament-based. Come out of a tournament, see where the world lies after your performance is in there. But I do believe that there's fundamentally more good being done by Gareth Southgate than harm. I think if you look at the comparisons between his reign and Fabio Capella's, it's a vastly different dynamic. But if we were to lose to Senegal, having played the way that we've played in this tournament, and I'm sorry, I know it sounds as if I'm being a miserable sod, but I have found England very pedestrian to watch. I haven't, I've gone to the games that I wanted to go to in this World Cup have predominantly been England games. I've been fortunate enough to be out in Doha, going to get the luxury of going to games, and I've wanted to go and see my home nation. I'm not one of those that sits there with this idea that, I must have the sentimentality of hoping that Messi wins the World Cup because of Messi's legacy. I couldn't care less. I want my country to do well. I want us to be proud of our players and our achievements. And Southgate, to some extent, embodies certain aspects of that. I just think that ultimately there's this missing component that goes with genius coaches, which is courage, charisma, and this alchemy that makes the team become inspirational. So if we lose to Senegal, I think it will be a disappointment. I think that there will be a potential reckoning either way after this World Cup. Even if we were to go and win this World Cup, which I think is highly unlikely, I think Southgate would probably consider his position. And if we were to go out in a disappointing fashion, I think he would consider his position as a result of a different set of dynamics. So I don't want to be on the bandwagon of just bashing Southgate, but I also don't want to be on the Stuart Pearce bandwagon where everything he does is right, and we have to look at this legacy. The legacy is a culture of winning. It's not about, some people say you've got to put up a good fight. A good fight is one you win, not one you turn up in. And if you build a culture of winning, then ultimately everything mushrooms from there. So I think the Southgate years will be perceived as windows of opportunity that weren't taken, And if it culminates in a window of opportunity in this World Cup that wasn't taken, I think people will look back and say, sensible time, not inspiring, pragmatic, sensible, maybe there's a base being built, and what's the next guy going to do and take us to the next level? Yes, I've had an embarrassment of riches in terms of playing Padel Tennis with some of arguably the greatest footballers of all time. The other day, Kaka, R9, who covers the court for a variety of reasons. I've had Gary Neville, which is not on the all-time greats. I think probably the best Padel Tennis player that I've seen this week is Gabriel Batistuta. South Americans tend to play this game very well, and so he was the most formidable opponent. What I took away from the Poland-Argentina game was actually it was a bloody good game of football in terms of Argentina playing in such a way that I wished sometimes our England team would play. It had energy and vitality. Yes, I get it that Argentina were probably given an easier run in that game because Poland were trying to see out a game to get themselves into the next stages. I didn't look at it from that point of view and say, well, Poland were a disgrace. I actually looked at it from the other spectrum, somewhat like I looked at it when I was watching Mexico play Saudi Arabia, that actually this was a highly motivated game with Argentina perhaps showing us what we'd been led to believe that they were going to bring to this World Cup, which was engaging, entertaining football. I know some people would say that ultimately Argentina are also a pragmatic side, but they played that game at a high level. Now, I'm not going to get into the territory of suggesting that Poland were a disgrace. I just think they played against a far better side, and so it became a situation with damage limitation. I think all the fans that have been over here have been pretty good. The England fans have been cheering their team on and also at times a little disappointed. I think probably the South Americans, because they bring an attitude and outlook that is steeped in a culture of loving their football. I think the Saudis were great because their expectations were limited, and of course the outcome of the game where they played Argentina brought out a reaction in this region. You know, we're over here, we've come into a tournament where there's been a lot of negativity about the way of life in this part of the world. So when you get to see this part of the world and this tournament seeing a particular region have something that was very momentous for them, their fans were sort of full of unbridled joy. So I kind of like that, not from a patronising sort of point of view where we're getting to see one of the minnows of world football seeing its fans celebrate. So I think probably my biggest takeaway so far has been the reaction from the Saudi fans. But when you're sat across bars, as I have been, seeing the Argentinian fans full of fervour, it got on my nerves a little bit because some of their attitude and disposition was based upon ridiculing Brazil in a game when they weren't doing particularly well and they just gotten beaten by Saudi themselves. So I think there's a mixed bag of fans, but I think probably you have to pay credit to all the fans, because we debated it in one of our shows with Jim about the culture of fans and the experience of World Cups. And when you spend your life imbued with domestic football and some of the tribalism and some of the unnecessary vitriol and some of the things that we're dealing with back in England, where fans have been singing things and there's been this backlash amongst English clubs about which fans have been singing about which tragedies happened at which particular football club. When you're in a space where it's just a festival of football, it's quite a nice experience to see fans generally, on the whole, all being highly motivated by celebrating rather than doing other fans down. Without a shadow of a doubt, the greatest showman in boxing is probably Tyson Fury. I always have been a massive admirer of Fury's and loved the showmanship. And then when I met Tyson, I really got the message, the memo of what charisma looks like in an elite sportsman, because he just exuded it. But there are times when Tyson departs into flights of fancy and ridiculous observations. Now, when you're talking about having 12 fights in the next 12 months and none of them are going to feature Alexander Usyk, I think it's silly. I think it brings him into a situation where people say, well, what's the point of listening to Tyson? Because he doesn't say anything of any substance. Of course he's going to fight Alexander Usyk. Of course that's the fight in town. Nobody wants to hear Tyson Fury fighting Derek Chisora. We're all going to endure and tolerate that and pay for it. I'm not going to, because I'm not going to watch it, and I'm going to be true to my word. I'm not going to criticise the fight and then subsequently rock up because I can get myself a ticket. That would be hypocritical. But we're all going to endure Tyson Fury getting past a tune-up fight, because once upon a time he was going to retire, then he wasn't. Then he put a situation in front of Anthony Joshua, as compelling as it is for all of us that we want to see Joshua fighting Fury. I actually think it was the right decision for Anthony Joshua not to take the fight at that stage, because we want the best version of Anthony Joshua if he does eventually fight Tyson Fury, so we can have that question answered. But I do feel that if you want to be taken seriously, and of course the body of Tyson Fury's work in the ring is taken very seriously, but when you get into these silly little comments about what's going to happen, how many fights he's going to have, and how he's not going to fight the leading competitor for the ultimate equation of, in an ideal world, undisputed, then it becomes silly. So I think he will absolutely fight Alexander Usyk. He'll fight him in March, and we will have those questions asked and answered. But to listen to Tyson going off on flights of fancy and making these sort of observations, I think diminishes him at some times, because I actually think he's better than that. And when you spend time with a guy and he's in a sensible mode, the insight you get to the fact he's a fighting man, the insight you get to his worldview, and some of his worldviews won't sit well with certain people, but his view of the boxing landscape. And I'm pleased, listen, when I sat next to him, when the fight with Chisora was announced, he was in a very engaging frame of mind and talked about wanting to be in the sport for a long period of time. But that doesn't equate to having 12 fights in 12 months, and it doesn't equate to not fighting Alexander Usyk. So what I want to do is get this little charade out of the way, which is the Chisora fight, get the Usyk fight made. I'd like to see him fight Joe Joyce. I'd like to see him fight Anthony Joshua, and I'd like us to keep it real. Right, that's it for this week's World Cup special in Doha. My time in here is almost done. I'm back in London next week, so I'm looking forward to seeing you there. Don't forget to keep liking and subscribing, and as importantly, leaving those brilliant questions in the comment section below, and I'll see you back in London.